Hey there. Welcome to the next episode of the Personal Branding for Professionals video podcast. As a part of the series, we spotlight powerful personal brands across the globe to inspire today's professionals. I'm your host, Ketaki Vaidya, and today's video is about living and breathing your brand. So, anytime anyone talks about personal branding, they definitely mention authenticity. And it is very easy in today's world to get lost in the crowd. It's very easy to just follow someone else, compare your journey with someone else, and do exactly what they are doing and hope to be successful. And we are so accustomed to behaving a certain way, we are so accustomed to giving in to the societal expectations that sometimes and most often we forget to be ourselves. So it's very difficult to find yourself, I agree. But even when you find yourself, it's equally difficult to stay true to yourself. And that is what this video is all about. It'll help you understand how you can be authentic, how you can live and breathe your brand, and how you can be yourself every day. And joining us today is Priyanka Komala. She is a tech leader at the US National Academy of Sciences. She's also the host of Career Up Startup Leadership podcast. This podcast aims to spotlight Asian leaders, and I'm a regular listener of this podcast. That's how I connected to Priyanka in the first place. She's an amazing speaker. She has a lot to offer, and I'm so excited to get her on this show and have her share her stories with all of you. So let's begin. Hey Priyanka, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ketaki, for having me. Such a pleasure, and I'm super excited to be part of the show.
And when I'm so accustomed to being a part of your podcast that I cannot believe that I finally have you on my show, and I'm so excited for this conversation.
It's such an honor, and I'm super excited to support you and get to learn more about you as part of your personal branding series. I really got to enjoy your YouTube shows, and I wish you all the very best as you continue to help people feel inspired on their personal branding journey.
Thank you so much. And I have wonderful people like you to look up to. And the very first thing that I'm really interested to know is tell us about your journey and what shaped you into being the powerful personal brand that you are today.
Thank you for your kind words. It's still a journey in the making, but right. As you said, it's good to collaborate, get to learn from each other, and that's the best part about the journey. For me personally, Ketaki, as an Asian woman who grew up in India and moved to the United States to pursue my education, it's very important to build a brand for yourself. And this is something that I realized back in those days where LinkedIn was getting started in the late 2000s. And I was one of the early adopters of LinkedIn. At that point in time, I didn't realize what a personal brand was because we never grew up with that kind of a narrative.
Yeah.
Personal branding was more reserved for Oprah Winfrey or Richard Branson, people who had something so impactful for the world to hear. But I thought it was a nice way for me to make connections, stay in touch with people that you meet. And that's how I got started on these different connecting platforms, say, for example, LinkedIn. And it's been an interesting journey as you see social media taking more prominence in our life, not just to showcase to the people what you're up to in your life, but creating the sense of community, helping each other succeed, and just being their cheerleaders. I think those are some interesting aspects I've learned in my journey. Yeah, so I'm super excited to share what will be of value to your listeners on personal branding.
Yeah, we usually have these cultural expectations from where we are coming, and they tell us to behave a certain way. And therefore, this personal branding and doing something that you want to do or something that is your passion, that never comes in our mind. And it's very difficult to stand out. So how did you make a brand for yourself, and how did you stand out amongst everyone else when you started your journey?
Thank you. And I really agree. The cultural expectations make you feel like you have to be in a certain way.
Exactly.
In order to be successful. For me, I followed what was very close to my heart. And now when I look back at my journey, like right from my school days, I was very good at storytelling. Like I would have a bunch of my cousins sit around me where I would share stories. I would lead them on various activities. And at school, I used to be the top in any oratorical competition. Like I always used to raise my hand whenever we used to have a competition where you had to be on stage and talk about anything. And I've won like several accolades, at the state level, at the Asia Pacific level. So that gave me a lot of confidence where I could share something and people would enjoy hearing it. So I didn't realize that was storytelling back in those days. I felt like it was more like a speech competition, but I was getting these rewards and awards. And I started realizing I had this talent in me. And thanks to my parents who believed that I had this talent, where I would always stand in front of the mirror and, practice all my speeches and make sure my body language was right, the way I
Yeah.
had my posture was right. So those were things that were very natural to me. And I think now when I connect the dots, I felt like I was destined to be into this storytelling mode. And personal branding is one aspect in which you showcase your talent, as well as the talent of others around you.
Right. And one thing that intrigues me the most about you is that you have so many aspects to your personality. And tell us about what a typical day in your life looks like. Because you're a podcaster, you're a STEM advocate, and so many other things. So, how do you manage all of it in a day? What does your day look like?
Just like everybody else, your day hustle,
Yeah.
where you focus on your day job. I'm a technology leader at the US National Academies of Sciences. So it's been impressive to work with scientists from all over the world to
Mm.
focus on issues that are of national interest based on the STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yeah.
On top of it, I've always enjoyed being a storyteller, as I mentioned. So I look for opportunities where I could showcase other stories. And let me just give you an example of why this started.
Mm-hmm.
As an Asian in the DC tech space, which is where I'm based out of in Washington, DC, I felt there was always a vacuum for Asians to spotlight their stories, to share their achievements. And I was meeting a lot of my friends who were startup owners, entrepreneurs, innovators, but they never got the spotlight that they deserved. And I saw it for myself when I achieved certain things, or when I wanted to showcase certain activities or certain thoughts that I wanted to showcase to a larger audience. I felt there wasn't a proper channel to communicate, especially for Asians in the media.
Mm-hmm.
I would have a bunch of my friends who were kind enough, who were influencers in their own field, who would amplify my voice. But
Yeah.
then when I looked around and I was like, somebody else is doing this for me. But what about the majority of my Asian friends? And that's how the idea of the podcast started, which I will get through as we go through this episode. But for me, I felt there was an opportunity for us to amplify voices of fellow Asians. And I felt that was very authentic and credible to me. And having had my own experiences putting out a personal brand and a narrative behind it, I feel as the storyteller, or I should say, the chief marketing officer of all my guests or my friends
Yeah.
who deserve a spotlight when they don't think that way.
Right. And that's such an interesting initiative because I'm sure that a lot of them, even though they have all these trends and they are passionate about so many things, but they struggle to find that medium through which they can shine. And your podcast is essentially connecting their stories to the world so that everyone can know the work that they're doing and they can get inspired to start their own personal branding journeys as well. And that's what personal branding is all about, right? It's about using our strengths to amplify our message, and great initiative that you're doing over there. I'm so inspired by it.
Thank you.
I think one particular thing that people struggle with when they are starting with their personal branding journey is to be vocal about their accomplishments. And there are a lot of us think that we are either boasting. A lot of us think that there is a negative notion that is associated with projecting our accomplishments, or maybe it'll sound condescending. So, how can one do that effectively when they get started and when they are starting to build their personal brand?
It's very interesting, Ketaki. You would think more accomplished women, would find it very natural to share their accomplishments. And I had a recent connection in my network who said, "Hey, Priyanka, I love the work that you do and the way you share your accomplishments and the accomplishments of others."
Mm,
And she's a VP at a certain company, so she's at a very strategic level, but she wasn't comfortable actually sharing some of the wonderful work that she had done. And
right.
that got me thinking. I was like, you would think somebody at that leadership position would find it very natural to share their accomplishments, but she felt, I have this feeling that it might sound as a brag, and I'm not comfortable with being in the limelight. I still want to share, but I don't really know how to do it. And
Yeah.
then after a few days, she messaged me back and I said, like, you should go for it. And, let me know when it's up and I'll amplify your voice with the rest of my network. And then she did it. And she felt so happy that, there was a dose of inspiration that she took from my work, which makes me feel happy that you are creating impact in small ways. It doesn't have to be a huge impact, but if you're creating a moral boost of confidence for someone to put out their accomplishments, I feel very grateful, in spreading that feeling that you don't have to be in a certain way or follow that Asian stereotype model where you put your head down, work hard, and somebody else is going to
Exactly.
recognize you.
Yeah.
You have to put your voice out there and then build that sense of community who would then help you amplify the voice. But the first step is always a challenge. And I did a recent research with, I give a lot of talks on personal branding, which is one of my area of interest. And I did a pre-talk survey with my participants to help for me to understand, like, what are some barriers for
Yeah.
people who want to put their personal brand out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of themes that I would love to share with your listeners. One is they feel very overwhelmed. They don't know how to really get started.
Right.
The second aspect is the scare of being in public. What are people going to think about me?
Yeah. The
How would
scare
they
of being
see my
judged.
work?
Yeah.
Right. And the third aspect is not feeling confident.
Hmm.
And that sense of imposter syndrome, which is, I don't know if I'm adequate. I don't know if my voice deserves the amplification.
Right.
Those are a couple of themes that I quickly saw. And then another aspect that I've seen is the fourth aspect is burnout.
Hmm.
You don't really know how to do this on a consistent basis. It's not like you put something out there and then you vanish and then people still recognize you. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. You have to build your brand on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
So when I saw those themes, I felt like there is a framework. If I think about how I look at personal branding, which I've developed, and as humans, we have a lot of psychological barriers.
Hmm.
And I feel it's just human to feel that way. And it's okay to not be okay, as everybody says. So you don't have to be that perfect diva who knows personal branding, who
Yeah.
posts like picture perfect Instagram pictures. But, as long as you are your authentic self, people recognize that and people cherish the fact that you are human. You go through a lot of struggles, vulnerabilities, and that makes people feel that you are somebody who inspires them in a very credible way.
Yeah. It is always better to take one step at a time, right? And that's one mistake that people often make when they're getting started on their personal branding journeys, because they try to have all of it figured out right when they're getting started, and that leads to a lot of delay. Eventually they just give up on that idea. So it's always about taking that first step, then looking at the outcome, considering that as an experiment.
That's very true. And given your show is focused on personal branding, I'm
Yeah.
quite sure you've gone through the nitty gritty details of what stops us from being our own personal brand. And I
Exactly.
have this PACMAN framework that I always use at the back of my mind, which I would love to share with your listeners at a very high level.
Sure.
So this PACMAN is something that it's easier for people to understand. And as you know, the game in our
Yeah.
90s, I know you're a little too young for the 90s kids maybe, but we used to play Pac-Man where you have this Pac-Man who goes through all these obstacles,
Yeah.
as part of the game, and you successfully ace through the maze to get to the end, right?
Hmm.
So here's my Pac-Man, which has worked for me, and I continue to experiment and tweak it, as you rightly pointed out. So for Pac-Man, your P stands for your personal highlight reel, and you pointed out some of the barriers that we internally face. And this is where I would love to share a research from Dan Cable, who's a professor of organizational behavior at the London Business School. And he talks about creating this personal highlight reel where you figure out what your signature strengths are.
Right.
And just a simple exercise that I would love to share with your listeners is block 15 minutes on your calendar and pick 3 people in your network. They could be your friends, your partner, your family, anybody who knows you well enough, and write good things about them, things that you've seen them where they have made an impact. So this is more like a storytelling for them.
Right.
And then once you've done with it, reach out to them and say like, hey, I really love the way you have created an impact, and here are some ways I've benefited through that impact. And one example that I could give for you guys is, think you are at your first day in your job, and it's so nerve wracking, right, when you walk into your office and you don't really know how
Yeah.
people are going to receive you. But if there's somebody who gives you a very tiny gesture, like takes you out for a coffee in the local neighborhood and makes you feel very comfortable, that goes a long way in building a very collaborative relationship. So think of your former boss, your manager, your peer at work who has done something good that made you feel, I want to achieve more. And here's a very conducive environment that will make it happen. And write to them and say, like, hey, I'm so glad you took me out to that coffee shop in the local neighborhood. I enjoyed getting to know the neighborhood. And thanks for making me feel so welcomed and being part of that team. And that made a great impact to who I am today.
Yeah.
And ask them for something that they have seen you where you have created an impact. And most of the times we just get through life, right? We don't really take a pause and reflect on how your gestures has helped someone. So this moment of introspection really would help you figure out what your signature strengths are. So reach out to those three people with the impact that they've created in your life and ask them in return for some of the impacts that you have created for them. And then you'll find some underlying patterns. Like for me, storytelling, bringing others' accomplishments into the limelight is something that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
If you're at a party with me, if you're at a get together with me, one thing that you would always leave with is the way you have created an impact. Because always I keep telling my friends and family joke about this is like, I would say, hey, let's say three good things about Ketaki. What do you love about Ketaki?
Yeah.
And then everybody goes through this round robin fashion and give some insights. And that makes you happy, right? Because you wouldn't have never asked for it. But if
Yeah.
somebody else is facilitating that, it gives you an inspiration. It makes you feel good. You feel like people think great about me. And
Mhm.
that's something that we have to do more often. And everybody goes through this round robin phase. So everybody leaves with something that's very impactful for them. And I enjoy playing such exercises and activities. And now when I see research which proves that these kinds of activities really increase your self-confidence, your self-esteem, and
Hmm.
wants you to make you do something more, that feels great. You feel like you're leaving with something that's much more productive. So I call this the personal highlight reel, where
Mhm.
you figure out what your signature strengths are. And once you have those lined out, the next thing, A in PACMAN, stands for acting on it. Because
Yeah.
most of the times you feel like, okay, my signature strengths are being a storyteller. For Ketaki, you're a wonderful host, trying to get the best for your listeners.
Yeah.
But what do you do with that? How do you take it to
Hmm.
the next level? You bring more amazing guests. You try to delve deeper into their personal struggles, their personal accomplishments. You got to act on your signature strengths. Just knowing isn't going to make a big difference.
Right.
And then the C as part of PACMAN is collaboration.
Hmm.
When you build your personal brand, a lot of people think that you have to do it all alone. But let me tell you, Ketaki, having done this for 10 plus years, you need to have a lot of supportive network, people who can collaborate with you, who can
Hmm.
toot your horn on your behalf as well. So collaboration is key. And we always know that teamwork is a winner strategy rather than just going all by yourself and trying
Exactly.
to be, a drop in the ocean. And then M in PACMAN stands for mindfulness. And
Hmm.
I've interviewed almost 80 plus guests on my Career Startup Leadership podcast where I spotlight Asian leaders. And one thing that's been very consistent is taking care of yourself. Personal brand doesn't just mean how you're projecting yourself in social media.
Yeah.
It's also looking inwards and figuring
Hmm.
out what are you doing for yourself, be it from an emotional, spiritual, physical standpoint.
Hmm.
And mindfulness plays a very important role in feeling that sense of gratitude. Once you know your signature strengths, you need to feel grateful that, being a storyteller, being a wonderful host, these are unique traits that Ketaki has. And,
Hmm.
you need to feel proud of it. And mindfulness is one way in which that sense of gratitude
Hmm.
comes into the picture as well. And then A in PACMAN stands for allies. We need to have men,
Yeah.
women, people outside of, people irrespective of their genders as part of your support network who can give you different perspectives. And that'll help you elevate your brand to the next level where you learn from somebody who's doing it really well and you feel like, say, for example, on LinkedIn, you can post an article that has really moved you. You don't always have to come up with your own content, but maybe there's somebody in your network who's sharing a piece of content and you have a thought that you would like to add to it. So having that form of allyship helps you tag somebody else and toot their horn, bring their thoughts
Hmm.
into the limelight. At the same time, you're adding your take. So you position yourself as somebody who knows that field or who's interested in learning more about that field as well. And then N stands for now. We always think, especially with this COVID pandemic, right? We feel like, oh, this is the new normal. Let's wait for the vaccine, or let's wait until life comes back to the old normal.
Hmm.
But right now is the time where you have to build what you love to do. And one thing that I feel very close to my heart is you have to bloom right where you're planted. You
Yeah.
just can't wait for the perfect scenario, the perfect environment for a flower to bloom, right? It has to bloom by adapting to the situations
Yeah.
that it's currently within. And that's something that is a wake up reminder for all of us that, you have to act now. So to sum up, the PACMAN strategy is building your personal signature strength reel,
Hmm.
having, acting right, now in the
Yeah.
moment, collaborating with people, creating the sense of mindfulness, having allyship, and using all of this in the moment to be present in the moment and do something which is impactful for you and for the people around you. So that's my personal branding framework. I hope your listeners would find useful.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that framework with us, because when we talk about personal branding, there are so many things out there that it can feel very overwhelming initially. But you've summarized it beautifully with this acronym, and I think that will make it very easy for anyone who's getting started on their personal branding journey. And
Thank
you've
you.
talked about you've given us a very beautiful line there, that you have to bloom right where you're planted, and that's one mistake that people are making during this pandemic era, that they are waiting for things to get back to normal, and then they will start maybe their personal branding journey, or then they will start acting on their goals. But if we keep waiting for that right time, it is never going to come, we all know that. So when we talk about you, Priyanka, we cannot distinguish the podcast from it, so we definitely have to talk about the podcast here. Tell us about what led to this podcast. How did you find that you wanted to do this? How did you find your passion in this?
Thank you for your kind words on that. And for me, when I was doing the podcast, it was not a very logical way of thinking. Like, I didn't have a strategy saying I have to do this podcast, have to be the best podcaster out there in the Asian
Yeah.
community. For me, I started looking at what are some core values that
Hmm.
I enjoy about myself. And one is being curious about people's experiences.
Hmm.
That's something that I really enjoy. When I meet anyone, and people who know me well would tell you this, is I'm always curious about what's happening in their lives from a learning perspective. I ask questions like, why are you doing this? Why this? Why not that? How is this working for you? So
Hmm.
that curiosity angle has always been something that's a signature strength of mine.
Right.
And two, I love meeting people, be it my Uber driver, when I get into a car, I'm always looking at personalization, that
Hmm.
15-20 minutes, you're never going to meet this person again. So I ask them, like, how is this working for you? How is this working from a revenue standpoint? What do you like? What you don't like?
Hmm.
So that curiosity of meeting new people, getting to know them. And then the third aspect is, as I pointed out earlier, it's the Asian diaspora is so big,
Yeah.
but we always see only a handful of people, be it like Indra Nooyi or Padma Shri Warrior, who have gone into the C-suite. We see them as role models, and Indra Nooyi is my personal role model. But we're looking at all the others who do interesting work in the Asian community. But if I ask you what are the top three other role models in the Asian community, I'm at a loss of words because I don't really know
Hmm.
anybody else apart from these top C-suite leaders. And that got me thinking. I'm like, there are a lot of people who are doing interesting work, but
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of them in the media. And
Hmm.
there are a lot of upcoming entrepreneurs, people who are doing interesting things. And I felt I want to create a platform where I could spotlight their stories. And my love for storytelling, meeting new people, getting to know their life experiences, and feeling inspired was all congruent. And that's how Career Startup Leadership podcast was born almost 18 months ago. So it was last July is when I started, July 2019. And it's been a very interesting journey. I've met around 80 plus guests on my show from across the world, be it India, United States, Canada, London. One of my upcoming guests is from Sri Lanka. So it's opened my eyes to learn a lot of things from these interesting people. And I strongly believe, Ketaki, as you know, I wouldn't have met all these people if
Yeah.
not for the podcast. So this gives me a platform to get to connect, build those meaningful relationships. And the best part again, Ketaki, is some of my guests have never been on a show,
Yeah.
a podcast, or have given a talk about the work that they do. And
Hmm.
I feel so happy when I spotlight a children's book author or an art curator, people from the STEM field, people who are outside of the STEM field, who follow unconventional paths and have led happy, purposeful, passionate lives. I feel people can learn from these role models and follow what makes them happy. It doesn't have to be the traditional way of doing things. So that's been my experience. And I've really enjoyed getting to meet at least 3 people every week. So 1 hour with each guest, getting to know their life stories. And in a nutshell, I get to learn their life struggles, accomplishments, in less than 60 minutes. And I can take at
Yeah.
least one takeaway from them, which can make me a better person and inspire my listeners as well. And we broadcast Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays. So it's very nice to connect with my live listeners and get to see the impact in real time too.
And that's such a noble thing that you're doing out there. As you said, there are some people who've never been on a podcast and now they get the spotlight, and they've always been amazing at their work, but somehow they never found the channel to showcase what their brand really was, and you're helping them to form that brand.
Oh, thank you. I love doing that. And personal branding is not like, a complicated concept. It's more
Yeah,
about how are
exactly.
you portraying yourself? What's the kind of narrative you want to tell the public? So when somebody thinks of you, they know what exactly are your talents. And it starts from within you. You have to figure out what those talents are and then use those to portray to the outer world, so they get to align with what is that you're trying to do in your time on this planet. So uh, I would say go for it. Think of it as a fun challenge, because everybody lives, right, Ketaki? You live, but what's the legacy that you want to leave
Yeah.
behind, so people know that you existed on this planet? Because everybody has a 9 to 5 job or a paycheck, pay all your bills, and wait for your weekend. I'm quite sure everybody on this planet wants to do it, but beyond that, what's some legacy you want to leave for your kids, for you personally? I think that why should always keep you going. So you're creating some impact to let people know that you existed.
Yeah, it's about defining your story. It's about sharing your legacy, as you said. And if we cannot do that, if we cannot use our strengths to build a story that can impact lives, then what are we here for anyway?
Right. And I really applaud your work, Ketaki, your personal branding series. I'm so glad you've narrowed down on a certain topic
Yeah.
that's of value to a lot of people. And this
Hmm.
cuts across a lot of genders and demographics. You don't
Hmm.
have to be of a certain age group, because there is this myth that the latest social media trends are for the younger generations, the Gen Zs and the millennials.
Hmm.
But what about the Gen X, Gen Ys? I mean, there's a lot of talent that they have, and they have to portray themselves without any kind of inhibitions, because gone are the days where somebody is going to come and figure out who is this working behind the desk and let me
Yeah.
recognize your work. You have to take the first step and just feel confident that you're doing something that's authentic to yourself, and you're doing this for yourself. Because at the end of the day, yeah, I think this pandemic has really opened up our eyes, saying like,
Hmm.
you come into this world alone, you're going to go out of this world alone, right? What is something that you're doing between those two phases of life, apart from your personal life, to create something that's of meaning, purpose, and of value to the others? I think that gives you immense amount of satisfaction, as you look at life, and do something one thing at a time, because that's going to make you feel good, and at the same time is helping somebody else.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your encouraging words, because this is the support that I'm looking forward to. And one thing that I've really seen around is that as professionals, a lot of us, we like to confine our worth to the professional accomplishment. So we think that we are excelling at our job, or we are already doing good. There's nothing else that I need to do. I'm good. I'm sorted for life. But if you can if you can get beyond your work, and if you can think about what differentiates you, or what makes you unique, or what is your story, then you start thinking along the lines of personal brand. And thank you so much for your time today, Priyanka. You shared some very great analogies and strategies with us. And apart from the PACMAN framework, there are two biggest takeaways for me here. One is that you have to follow the path of speaking for yourself versus letting your work speak for yourself, right? So that's the mindset that we have to build for ourselves. And the second one is that we should never be afraid to ask for help, because asking for help and collaboration, that can open a lot of doors which we are otherwise unaware of, and we should always try to take that first step. So thank you so much for demystifying personal branding for us. It was truly an honor to host you.
Thank you, Ketaki, and I'm so glad the nuggets of wisdom were insightful to you, and I hope for your listeners as well. And live your brand and have a fun life. I truly wish you all the very best. So reach out to amazing guests and put your work out there, and I'm quite sure you'll continue to inspire a lot of young people in this planet.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. That means a lot to me, and thank you so much for agreeing to this interview.
Awesome. And to our listeners, do subscribe to Ketaki Vaidya's personal branding show on YouTube and give her a like and a thumbs up.
And also Career Startup Leadership Podcast. You definitely have to go check it out. I'm going to share all the links in the description below, so you can go check out Priyanka's work. I'm also going to share a few talks of Priyanka's that have inspired me a lot. She's a keynote speaker and she's delivered some amazing talks and analogies at various places. So you can go have a look and be inspired by her.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.